Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Creatively Free. I'm your host, arielgrace. And today I have the delightful pleasure of having Warwick Saint on our show. And he is a world-renowned photographer and multimedia, mixed media artist. I'd love to have you introduce yourself.
My name is Warwick Saint, and I am a photographer artist, and I live my life with a lot of passion, and I like to live my life on the edge, or at least find where my edge is, and I think my ultimate purpose is to elevate humanity and the world through art and beauty. So that's, I think, who I am, although that is the great proverbial question of all time is, who am I?
What we do on this show is really explore the question of creativity and how your soul expresses, right? And I feel like in immersing in your world and what you've created in your lifetime, at least what I've observed is that you've really had the opportunity to express in a lot of unique ways. And so I'd love to hear from you how your creative expression has evolved.
It's a great question. Well, I mean, I would say that I started creating when I was a toddler. My father was a graphic designer, and some of my earliest memories are with him over my shoulder when I'm doing little paintings and things like that. So it's been part of my upbringing since I was a tiny little kid. My mother was a model, so my earliest memories of her, my folks separated when I was very young. My earliest memories of my mother was watching her modeling on photo shoots. And I grew up in South Africa, so it wasn't like it was London or Paris. I mean, it was kind of a little country in the tip of Africa at the time. I'm now 52 years old. It's been a long time. And I think I've never actually been asked this question before, so it's interesting. I think where it started was obviously in that beautiful naivety of being a toddler. Then at the early days of my career, it was really about becoming a great photographer. That was my passion. I threw everything into photography. I was painting a lot when I was in my teens, and I was also playing the guitar. And then when I decided to do photography, I dropped everything and just went all in. And I think it had its pros and its cons. It's very singularly focused. So of course I was able to go pretty deep pretty quick. But I think at the same time, it's also good to keep other creative channels open, which is what I'm learning now in my middle life. And I would say from the beginning of my photographic career up until I was about 45 years old, it was just very, very photographer based. My whole identity was roped up in being a photographer. And I was a commercial photographer. I did a lot of creative work, but essentially I was shooting for magazines and shooting for brands, etc. And then at about 45, 47 years old, I had this midlife awakening, and I wanted to do something that was more expressive of me and take the work even further and take it beyond what I think is possible. And that's when I started expanding beyond the lens into this mixed media, mixing photography and paint. So yeah, it's been a journey, and now I'm also doing work with AI and other things like that, which is sort of a top secret project I don't really want to talk about, but I'll just mention it because it's exciting. It's all exciting stuff.
Yeah, I have a tech background, so I have philosophies on AI as well, but obviously everything in tech and really in the world has a dark and a light, right?
Of course.
But I do feel that it's going to absolutely blow open opportunity for artists. Absolutely, just content creation gone wild.
I believe that very much. It's also going to wipe out a lot.
I know.
So there's never a more important time to get down with your own humanity right now. Is what I say. Yeah.
When I was immersing in your art, there's a playfulness to a lot of it, and the word experimentation just came up over and over as I was looking through your work. And so I wanted to hear from you, how did that show up in your career?
Well, I think when I started assisting being an assistant photographer in the early days of South Africa, South African photographers in the 80s and early 90s had to cover so many different genres Not like in London where there's a robust photographic industry, or New York where you could be very, very much a specialist. So I would work on these shoots where, I was doing a craft shoot and then a still life shoot and then a model shoot and all these different types of genres of photography. And I think that what's really sort of opened up the blinders for me in terms of trying different things. And then when I moved to London in the 1994, taking my little portfolio around to fashion magazine, I had to sort of come up with an angle. I had to come up with something that was different to try and get a foot in the door. I like the idea of bringing two ecosystems together, and I think that's where a lot of creativity happens. So, for example, I would bring my technicalities around car photography and bring that into the beauty space, or my interest in this one book that was introduced to me in the early days of London, a guy called Thomas Edgerton, who is called Stopping Time. And it's all this high-speed photography of bullets going through apples. And it's a very scientific photography, a lot of macro photography, the crown with water droplets shot at like 10,000th of a second, that kind of thing. And I was inspired by that. But then I thought to myself, how can I bring the edge when I was approaching magazines like Dazed and Confused, In the Face, and Arena, etc. And I got into Dazed actually by saying, look, let's do a scientific lighting shoot with balloons popping, but do it on a model wearing Alexander McQueen. And they loved the idea, and hence I got in. I think that served me from the beginning, and it continues to serve. And we have to, as artists, take a leap into the void. It's really important because nobody else is going to do it unless we do it. So the idea of experimenting is key because you don't know what you are capable of until you give it a try. Thus, you got to give it a go. And that's my philosophy. There's been lots of failures, trust me. lots of learning experiences. Yes. You either win or you learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hear more around what it feels like inside of you when you have a creative nudge. What is that experience to go a certain way and try something different?
Well, it's definitely edgy, and it's quite vulnerable internally. And I think I compensate for that by being a bit like overly passionate, maybe, or like a bit bravado, like I have a lot of bravado. Let's just do it, rah! Meantime, inside, I'm like, is this even going to work? I think it's a little bit like if you ever jump off a cliff into a rock pool or something like that, and there's that moment of being on the edge, and you got to kind of go, and you have that nervousness. But when you jump, make sure you jump. Like, don't do a half jump, because then you're going to hurt yourself on the way down. And that's kind of what it feels like for me when I'm about to do something that I've never done before. Because I have all this trepidation. When I commit, and I just go for it. And yeah, I think you have to do it like that. Otherwise, you will probably fail.
Yeah, edge creation, just jump.
Exactly, and jump far, jump out, just like jump as far into the void as you can.
Amazing. I'm picturing when I actually jumped off a cliff in Maui, and I took the wrong advice and lifted my legs and really injured myself. Like, don't do that. Just jump.
Don't lift your leg. Yeah. Feet first, off you go. Amazing. For sure. And look, we are in the world of art, so it's at the end of the day. Look, if it messes up and it fails, one's biggest lessons come from the failures. I worked 2 months last year on 2 large mixed media pieces, and at the end of it, I looked at them and I was like, it's a fail. It's not up to scratch. And the remorse and the hurt and the heartbreak and the sense of lost time and, oh my God, I've wasted so much time. That was very much alive. And then now when I look back, I'm like, oh my God, thank God that happened, because I now have a much clearer understanding of what actually works and what doesn't work. Yeah. So the downside is not huge. If you're in the confines of your studio. Of course, if you're a musical performer and you go out on stage in front of 30,000 people, it might be a different story. But that's not what we're talking about.
And so, would you say that the awareness inside of you around what is and is not a failure is because you've kind of developed your craft over time and can really use that expertise?
For me, the gauge is if I can look at it like it's an interesting thing, right? Because it's like these failed pieces, or that I consider a failure, somebody else came into the studio and was like, oh, I love that. That's great. I think it's awesome. And it's nice to hear that. But I'm not making the work for other people. I'm making it for me. And that's the difference. I have to love it. I have to be able to look at it and be like, okay, I love it. And then also have the foresight to know that I'm going to love it still in years to come. And that's the tricky thing with art, right? Because we want to create, or at least I want to create something that is contemporary and of the moment, and yet it is also timeless. And that's what great art is. It's like something that is of the moment. It was definitely a spearhead in culture of the moment. It changed culture. And if you look at it 100 years later, you're like, wow, that's still a great piece of art. Now, obviously time will tell, but in my present state, when I'm looking at a painting, for me, it has to have a certain simplicity to it, a certain complexity to it, the sense that it will keep revealing more and more the more you look at it. So, and it's got to be beautiful. And even if it's grotesque, it still has to have a sense of beauty. I'm very much a fanatic of beauty. I love beauty, and I want to create beautiful art. Not all artists want to do beautiful art. Some are more into the concept, or beauty is not sort of high up on the list necessarily. It's maybe a more intellectual thing or a conceptual thing. But for me, it has to be beautiful, and that comes from being a photographer and photographing people and photographing a lot of celebrities and wanting them not only to look beautiful but to feel beautiful as a result of gracing my lens. So, and my mother was a model, and I've been involved and surrounded by beauty very much my whole life. So it is sort of top of the list, so to speak, in terms of me qualifying and grading my own artwork.
Yeah. Elaborate more on beauty. What is beauty?
That's an amazing question, because I still don't quite know, and I don't know if anybody really does. There's a great saying, I think it was by Keats, where he said, "Beauty is truth, and truth is beauty, and that's all there is to know, and all you need to know." Beauty is something that touches the divine. That's whatever that is for you. It goes beyond aesthetics. Of course, aesthetics is a part of it, but really that's only the channel, the gateway. But beauty is something where there's a direct channel or some kind of thread, just a little thread that touches the divine in one way or another, whatever that is for you. And I think it is subjective. I don't know if there is such a thing as objective beauty. Maybe if you look at an orchid or something like that. But I suppose in a context like that, it is the divine, right? It's a creation of nature. So I think that would be my best answer to that question. My best stab at it, my best go of it is to feel the divine channeling through that piece of work. I would then consider it a beautiful piece of work.
And if I'm following you correctly, that is what creates that sense of soul satisfaction for you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, beauty is subjective. So it's like there's a soul satisfaction when I look at something and I'm like, wow, that's really beautiful. I'm so proud of that. There's a piece I did called Nietzsche's Goddess, which is on my website. And it's kind of these body stacks, and it's very integrated and it's quite complex, but there's a lot of grotesqueness that has come through that with the way the faces are abstracted, the photography and the interplay of the paint. And I consider that a beautiful piece of work, although it is like unbelievably grotesque in some areas of it. So that's for me. And then also I think what is soul satisfaction, and this is more the ego, maybe the ego speaking, as if somebody else looks at the work and has a beautiful experience or feels that divinity in one way or another for themselves. So ultimately I am making it for myself, but it is nice to get that qualification or that acknowledgement from others that whom I respect, yeah.
Absolutely. Do you find that your work you've gone through phases as you've described? Is there something pulling you? Like, is there a multidimensional aspect in terms of like, what is the thing that is pulling you towards exploring new types of art?
It's a great question. Really great questions. I think I want to try and create something that I've never seen before. There's a lot of art out there and a lot of things have been done, and photography and painting hasn't been done a ton. Obviously, it's out there, but generally, what I have seen, and I could be wrong, and send me stuff if you think otherwise. But there's a lot, like for example, like John Baldessari would do a big blotch of red paint over a black and white film noir picture, and it's these very opposing mediums that juxtapose up against one another, and it creates this tension. But they sort of exist in their own space, so to speak, and then they're sort of fighting for that space on the canvas. And with this work, it's kind of like I want to still create that tension between the two mediums, but have it integrated. So I don't know what I'm looking at, or the viewer doesn't necessarily know what part is painting and what part is the photography. It becomes like a third thing. Like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that's what's pulling me in this particular these particular mediums at the moment. And then I think generally, what pulls me is it's life in general. I have done a fair amount of psychedelics in my time, so I have had some pretty interesting visuals and pretty interesting experiences that have and do influence my work. I think that's probably the chaos in the colors and the fractaling that happens. Not that I'm ever trying to do fractally work, but it does happen with the paint. So I think, again, a lot of those experiences, I did feel like there was a sense of the divine coming through in terms of the geometry and the shapes and the depth and the sort of the general sort of psychedelic space one can experience. So it's trying to bring that onto the canvas as well. That's interesting for me, and also it's the idea of the immediacy of painting. That is what is very, very interesting for me. As a photographer for 25 years, the process of photography is very much relational. If I were to photograph you, for example, you would be influencing the photograph as much as I'm influencing the photograph. There will be this dance between me and you during the photo session. And of course, when you expand that to a celebrity, when they're coming with their hair and makeup and styling and fashion, and it's all these relationships that are happening on set. And as the photographer, it's my job to orchestrate these different musicians, orchestrate these different creatives, so to speak, to produce one beautiful sort of ensemble, one beautiful image. But it's very much relationship, and there's a dance that happens, and sometimes there's compromise, and if the subject isn't feeling well, if they don't want to be in a certain pose or whatever, there's this dance, right? And then, but from that, I get an image. And what's interesting to me now is that when I'm in the studio and I have that image printed up on canvas and I'm painting on it, now it's just me and the immediacy of the paint and the brushstroke that's happening with nobody, with no relationship. I'm now in a relationship with the product of a previous process. And I find that pretty fascinating. And I find it fascinating that painting, I think, is probably the oldest form of artistic expression of mankind. I'm sure the rock paintings go back 75,000 years. And to be in this ancient process of art making in relationship to this high-tech process of photography of today is, for me, very, very fascinating. And it's pretty rewarding, and it's the kineticness, it's the immediacy, it's the fact that there's a physical action in real time and space by a human being that produces a result of the mark, and hence this art is then created. So that is of a lot of inquiry right now, and it's something that I'm really exploring.
I very much relate to that. I had been in digital design for most of my career and found a moment in which I had to do, journaling and painting, and became fascinated with like the brain to hand piece of artistry and how that can really get lost in digital art, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, when I started photography, it was I started in the 80s when I was a teenager, but in the 90s, it was very much film and chemicals, and it was a very organic, magical process. And then in the late 90s, Photoshop came. So now all of a sudden we are retouching images. And then in the early 2000s, digital backs came on the scene. And then the screen came on set. Now everything's digital, right? So now there's none of this organic process anymore. Kind of like the magician's box was sort of opened all to be revealed, for everybody on set. And then Instagram, and now it's sort of very super disposable, like a flick of the thumb. And then AI is now generating incredibly photographically real images. So I think it's time to double down on humanity and the brain-hand connection.
Right. And really just taking it to experiential art type of opportunities, like communal art. There's so much opportunity in that.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, and the funny is, AI art as well, believe it or not, can also be maneuvered and manipulated to create a deeper experience of one's own humanity, which is a project that is top secret. I don't recommend it. Well, I really want to because it's so exciting.
Yeah, next year.
It'll be Art Basel this year.
Oh.
But it's anonymous. So if you see it, you won't know it's me. It's a project my wife and I are doing together.
That's really amazing. So for my listeners, I would love to hear if they're finding their way. A lot of my listeners in becoming, confident in being an artist, kind of breaking the rules with their creativity. And like we talked about, following their creative urges. Do you have any tips for them on, how to get unblocked and continue to follow that journey?
Yeah. Well, the getting unblocked thing is something that I struggle with every day. So just get used to it, I would say. That's the hardest part, is showing up to the canvas or to the sculpture, or whatever the medium you're working in. There's a lot of resistance. There's an amazing book that talks about this called The War of Art. It's worth a read for those out there. I would also say another great book is The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. An incredible book. It's a new one from maybe a year or two ago. He goes deep into the philosophy of art and what it takes to be an artist and the importance of being an artist. So I still look at those books today and read them. And keep the energy moving and flowing. And I would say, just go for it, for sure. Just go for it. But also, I mean, I kind of cringe by saying this, but you have to kind of also have an audience. An artist without an audience it's tough to make it if you don't have an audience. So whatever you have to do to try and build that audience, I would say, do it. And even if that's edgy, a lot of artists, we don't like promoting ourselves. We don't like putting ourselves on the edge, but you really do have to do it, especially now. It's so important. And that's something I struggle with. If I had my perfect world, I'd just do my art and not worry about any of that stuff. But it's a necessary thing to do. So definitely do a little research around that and how to build an audience, how to create your niche, and do what you're passionate about. And it's kind of like, I don't know if you've heard of what they call an ikigai. It's a Japanese term it's like a vector diagram. And I think it's what you're good at and what you can make a living from and what's on purpose. Or I think it's those three things. And it's kind of, if you want to try and look at the ikigai and find what's in that central thing, because that's where you should be putting most of your attention. And it's okay to go into these other circles every now and then, but I think staying in the center point of that is really where you should be focusing your attention. So do what you're passionate at. Make sure you promote yourself, put yourself on the edge, get out there, get outside of your comfort zone, get uncomfortable. But you'll start getting better at it. And then once you have an audience, then hopefully you'll be off to the races.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's actually my program is a lot around the business side of art, actually, and yeah, that's for many artists the number one block. Don't want to do that, don't want to learn that. I'm
Yeah.
curious for your journey, how in the entrepreneurial side, how much have you devoted energy to that side of things?
I mean, it's probably 50-50, to be quite honest with you at this point. It was actually almost less when I was a photographer, because I had an agent and I was pretty much showing up and using my talents to promote somebody else's brand or product, which is one of the reasons why I kind of stopped doing that and started doing it for myself, because I wanted to do something that was more intrinsically meaningful to me. But as a result, I have to do a lot more like promoting, marketing, and sometimes I sort of cringe and was like, oh man, but you just, without an audience, it's really tough. It's just tough. You need an audience, and make the art for yourself, build an audience. Just got to do it. Andy Warhol has got this famous quote. It's something like, the real art is in the business, or something like this. I had an incredible businessman give me some advice once. It was a few years ago. He's built many companies, and I said to him, how do I scale as a photographer? This is all, they all talk about business. In business, they all talk about scale. And he said to me, it's actually the wrong question to ask, because as a photographer, you can't really scale. It's like you're showing up at but have you seen artists scale? And I'm like, well, yeah, like who? Oh, Damien Hirst, Andy Warhol. Study those guys. And I have. And, you can scale art, because ultimately you're producing a product. And so you need an audience. And I know it's cringeworthy. I know we don't want to do it. It's a different part of the brain, but
study the ones that have done it before you.
Study the ones that have done it before you, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. It's a fact that your success as an artist there's not a direct relationship between your success as an artist and the quality of. There just isn't. There are a lot of very successful artists out there, but the art is it's okay, right? It's not amazing and it's not terrible. It's okay. And there's a lot of amazing artists out there that produce exceptional work that are just not successful, in the common sense of the word, finances and not being broke, et cetera, et cetera. So if you can get the two to work together, do great art and figure the marketing out, then you're onto something. So think of it as art in itself. That's what I would do. It's like, really think of it as it's in itself is an art. Is to promote yourself, get yourself out there, get your message across. Like that is an art. And that's something I'm still figuring out as I'm going along. It's not like I'm an expert at it, but one thing I do know is that I'm definitely out of my comfort zone a lot of the time when I'm putting myself out there.
Yeah, me too. And I agree with what you're saying here around the experience. Like create it how you feel, right? Like marketing doesn't have it. You can add art to marketing, right? Like it doesn't have any. I think that's the disruption side that makes me happier. When I don't have the rules, right?
Right. It's finding the right question to ask. That's ultimately what it is. Rather be like, oh, marketing, I don't know, do this. Like, how can I make this unique, and how can I make marketing my art something unique to me and an art into itself and enjoyable? Like, that's a great question to ask. So, start there. Start with the question, and hopefully that puts you in the right direction. And then, then you take incremental steps into figuring that out. And where you end up 10, 20 steps will be a very different place than where we're standing right now. And starts in the first step. And the first step starts with asking the right questions, finding the right questions to ask.
Absolutely. This may be rhetorical, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you feel creatively expressed? Does it have an endpoint where you're like, I'm good, I am expressed?
I think it's more of an act. It's not a destination. It's not really a destination. It's like, am I now swimming in creative expression? Yes. Today I have been. It's been a bit of a struggle. I'm working on something new, and I haven't painted in a little while, and sort of getting my feet wet, my hands dirty again, and my feet wet. And But it's really more of a verb, I would say, than it is a destination or a noun. So it's the act of expressing, the act of creation. It's like it's a doing thing, and I think as long as you're doing it, then you're in it. But I have never. Well, put it this way: I've looked at previous work and be like, wow, I really hit it. That's just awesome. Like I nailed it. Like I'm looking at it now, and it still hasn't lost its gravitas and its element of beauty. So that I would feel like, yeah, I nailed that expression. I have the results of it, but I don't ever feel like, oh, I'm done. I'm now expressed, or I'm now enlightened. I'm now like, no, none of that. It's showing up to the process. To answer your question, it's really about the process. Mm. Just show up for the process. Like every day, just show up for the process. That's what you need to pay attention to. That's what's going to pull you through at the end of the day.
I have listened to your process. And, just before we wrap up, I'd love to hear one question that came up for me on that. What stood out? And I have heard this from other artists that are, devoted to the art, is a rigor in the structure of what you're doing that creates the space for the flow. And I would like to hear from you. How did you develop that?
I hired a great painting teacher to come live with me for a year to teach me. Because when I started painting again at the age of 46 or something like that, I realized I really kind of forgotten everything. And what I did know wasn't really relevant. And splashing paint on photography. And this is the experimental stage. And I was just like, oh my God, this is like horrible. Like, what am I going to do? Like flat and just messy and just kind of, and I was like, who do I know that's a really good painter? So a friend of mine, I was like, dude, just come live with me. Let's paint together. So sort of painted together, and he taught me a lot in terms of it really is getting yourself in the right frame of mind in peak emotional state. That's super important. And to do that, for me, it takes a certain sort of sense of ritual. Like I have to do a meditation, do some breathing. I have to have a workout, maybe do a cold plunge, and then maybe just move my body, and then set my palette, set my studio. It takes an hour to 2 hours to get into that state. And again, I think, coming back to what you were saying, it's this idea of structure and flow. I'm a big believer in it. I think the whole universe really revolves around the idea of structure and flow, or should we say masculine and feminine energy. The masculine being the structure, say the banks of the river, and the flow being the waters, the flow of the river. And without the banks of the river, it would just be a swampy marsh. It wouldn't have any flow to it, right? So I think it is important to build structure around your practices, build structure around your process, and kind of keep it pretty much the same. That for me really helps, so that when you are in the flow, that's where you kind of feel most supported in your creative expression. That's for me. I keep saying you, but I'm really talking about me.
I would say for me as well, and it could change, right? Like you could change the structure based on the project, of course, right? Of course. But yeah, creating that container of the time of day, or something that you can, because we're habit forming people, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's not like somebody's demanding that I have to show up here at 9 a.m. It's not like I'm working for somebody else. You're working for yourself as an artist in general, right? So to have that sense of structure, that sense of blocking of time, because everybody, we're in an attention economy. Everything is trying to pull our attention away from us constantly. The phone, social media, everything out there is trying to do advertising, this, that, blah, blah, blah. And for us to do any meaningful work, I think it's really important to block the time and to make that sacred. It's sacred work. Being an artist is sacred work. That's my belief. It's really the spearhead of human expression. It's the spearhead of culture. I think more so than ever, it's more important now than ever to dive even deeper into that creativity. So I would say treat it as sacred work, and show up for the process that works.
Beautiful, sacred, and sometimes rebellious work. Love it.
There's a lot of, there's these great like Drikpa Kunli and all these like Tibetan, should we say, monks. Some of them were like the madmen. This stories. At the bottom, what I'm trying to get at is like there can be a lot of profane in the sacred, a lot of rebelliousness, a lot of breaking the rules. It's not all like so. It's really important to have that reverence for the time in the studio, or for the time in your creative process, wherever that may be.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really inspiring for me, and I'm really grateful for your time today.
I appreciate this. Thank you, Ariel.